These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer healthcare, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide healthcare to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a week.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Well, Donald Trump started it. Joe Biden is finishing it. Both screwed it up. We just had to say that the Biden administration did not see this moment coming is a huge testimonial to the bizarre navel-gazing that's been going on inside the Pentagon and the State Department, apparently, for the last year and a half. Where this really all began, and, I'm writing about this today over at Hartmann Report with the headline, "When Will We Stop Letting Our Presidents Lie Us Into Wars?" But really where this all began was, back in, well, let's start at the beginning, actually. It began on, right after 9/11. When George W. Bush, well, the Taliban actually reached out to Bush and said, we will give you bin Laden. We won't give him to you. We'll give him to a third country if you'll give us any evidence that bin Laden had something to do with 9/11. Bush said, screw you, I want to bomb this country. Afghanistan at that point in time was the second poorest country in the world. They had no functioning air force. Their army was a joke. It would have been easy to take down, which is what Bush did. He went ahead and took them down. He was in big trouble at that point in time. He was viewed as an illegitimate president. His father's guy on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, had been the deciding vote to make him president in the 2000 election. This was just what he needed. But and for Dick Cheney, Halliburton had acquired Dresser Industries. It was on the verge of bankruptcy. Dick Cheney then became vice president, and I think therefore. And said, hey, let's invade Afghanistan and let's give some fat contracts to Halliburton. In fact, they were among the first to get these huge no bid, no ceiling contracts. So let's not forget, another president lying us into a war. Polk did this with the Spanish-American War, or the Mexican-American War, rather, saying that the United States had been invaded by Mexico. Even Abraham Lincoln called him out on that one. McKinley did this in 1898 with the Spanish-American War, saying that the Spanish had blown up the USS Maine in Havana Harbor when actually the boat just caught on fire. Lyndon Johnson did this with Vietnam. Robert McCormick, his defense secretary, came out and knowingly lied about the attack in the Gulf of Tonkin. LBJ apparently for the first couple days didn't realize it was a lie, but once he figured it out, he went along with it and lied us into the Vietnam War. We have to stop our presidents from lying us into wars. It's just got to be like the new rule in America. So number one. Number two, then in 2019, Donald Trump is looking at, re-election, just like George W. Bush was in 2001. Going to war was part of the George W. Bush's strategy to get himself, to become a two-term president, to get himself reelected. He was right up front about it. He told Mickey Herskowitz, his biographer, about this. In fact, here, this is Cindy Sheehan telling us the story back in the day.
As a matter of fact, in interviews in 1999 with respected journalists and longtime Bush family friend Mickey Herskowitz, then Governor George Bush stated, "One of the keys to being seen as a great leader is to be seen as commander-in-chief. My father had all this political capital built up when he drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he wasted it. If I have a chance to invade, if I had that much capital, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to get everything passed that I want to get passed, and I'm going to have a successful presidency," end quote.
So you've got, the 9/11 pilots and the people who hijacked the planes were not in Afghanistan, to the best of my knowledge. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I believe that all or most of them were not, quote, trained in Afghanistan. That was more for the low-level grunts. Bin Laden was running his little school there. Bin Laden was not in Afghanistan. He was in Pakistan getting dialysis on 9/11. The planning for 9/11, which was done by Mohammed Atta, remember we arrested him? We convicted him of this. He was the mastermind of 9/11. That planning was done in Germany and in Venice, Florida. And when the program went down, Atta was in Pakistan coordinating it. So what does Afghanistan have to do with this? Well, that's where bin Laden was, that was where his base was. But what did it have to do with 9/11? I'm not sure anybody to this day knows, but it was a convenient, excuse to get into a war. But let's even look at more recently. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago, in 2019, Donald Trump is looking at wanting to get reelected in 2020. He figures, I got to start, fulfilling campaign promises. I said I was going to get us out of Afghanistan. So he goes to the Taliban. First, he goes to the president of Pakistan. And he says, this top guy in the Taliban who is in your jails here in Pakistan, this top guy in the Taliban, his name is Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. I want you to release him from prison. Now, the Afghan government did not want Trump to do this. They were cut out of the talks. They had nothing to do with these talks. The State Department, previously had been a little. They had been all in favor of this guy being in prison in Pakistan. But Trump said, let him go. Pakistan let him go. Trump then negotiates with him and cuts a deal that all U.S. forces will be out of Afghanistan by May of 2021. Last May, a few months ago. That, in 2019, became the signal to all of the 300,000, 350,000 official Afghan military forces that we were basically subsidizing. Some folks put the number at 600,000, which is why I paused there. I've seen the numbers all over the place, but it seems like the official number was 350,000. That basically was the cue to them that when the Taliban shows up, lay down your guns and switch sides. because America no longer has your back. Here's Donald Trump bragging about this at one of his rallies just a few months ago.
I started the process. All the troops are coming back home. They couldn't stop them.
We need to restart that, Sean? Okay. Oops, hang on just a second. There we go.
I started the process. All the troops are coming back home. They couldn't stop the process. 21 years is enough, don't we think? 21 years. They couldn't stop the process. They
being
wanted to,
Biden.
but it was very tough to stop the process when other things are out. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a shame. 21 years by a government that wouldn't last. The only way they last is if we're there. What are we going to say? We'll stay for another 21 years, then we'll stay for another 50. The whole thing is ridiculous. So we're bringing our troops back home.
Well, there you go. So Trump cuts this deal with this mullah who yesterday declared himself president of Afghanistan after Trump let him out of prison in Pakistan. And the deal was, he cut the entire Afghan government out of this deal. And so today you've got the foreign minister of the United Kingdom coming right out and saying it. This is, the defense minister, Ben Wallace. He said the die was cast when the deal was done by Donald Trump, if you want my observation. But again, I have to say, the fact that the Biden administration did not get our people out sooner, and I realize it was all tied up in the, hysteria, Republican hysteria about you're going to bring how many people from Afghanistan to America? Wait a minute, those people are Muslims. They might be terrorists. They got brown skin. You can't have, I get it. But still, this, and there are folks who are arguing that whole argument, put Biden in a box, and I'll give you that. But I suspect heads are going to roll at the State Department over this, and maybe the DOD. They should have seen this coming. This should not have been a surprise. And we have got to stop having presidents lie us into wars. It just has to stop. We've had two of them in my lifetime, Vietnam and Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, three. And Iraq. We were lied into Iraq, too. And I'm just, over it. So, anyhow, there's a lot to process here and a lot to deal with. And, as we go through the show today, I also want to get into Greg Abbott is he going to throw teachers in jail? We'll get into that in our second hour. And the Trump death cult and Ron DeSantis in our third hour. But right now, your thoughts on Afghanistan, what we should have done, where we could have gone, what went wrong.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And perhaps most importantly, how do we prevent ourselves from being lied into another war by a future president? We'll be right back. And welcome back. Nick in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hey, Nick, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I think the only one we have to blame for this, whether it ended today or 15 years ago, is George Bush Jr. for going in the first place. So all the blame is laid on him as far as I'm concerned.
That's my point. And when I remember 1974, when everybody came, when Saigon fell and Jerry Ford was dealing with that disaster. Was it 75? No, it was 74, wasn't it? In any case, I remember when it happened, and there was no mention that I recall of how we got into that war in the first place, the fact that LBJ lied us into the war. And, I'm a fan of LBJ and with regard to his social policies, but, his lies cost the lives of 2 million Vietnamese and 56,000 Americans. And nobody was talking about it, and nobody's talking about Bush right now. I watched the news for 2 hours this morning, didn't hear George Bush's name mentioned once.
I know. It's a shame. Yeah, I was talked into the war by Johnson, too, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, we've got to nail this thing down. Nick, that was your point?
Yeah, that was my point.
Okay, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Kusai in Campo, California. Hey, Kusai, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I just want to say, first of all, regardless of our views about the Afghan war, the men and women who bled and died there deserves better than we leaving the battlefield without any dignity like some thieves in the night.
I agree.
That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that we never go anywhere with good intentions. We always install crooks for our so-called democracy and nation changings because they're the only one that will do business with us. We don't go there because we want to do anything better. Yeah. We will go there because our national interest, which is the big corporations, dictate that we go. And then the second thing is we always pick whoever is going to play well with us, and they end up being crooks. Look at Maliki in Iraq. Look at this mess here in Afghanistan. These are not accidents. These are deliberate acts of our foreign policy because we truly do not want democracies in any of these places. We want business.
I'm not sure that it's entirely that we don't want democracy, Kusai, although I agree with you that if we're talking about the choice between a real democracy or an oligarchy that works with our big businesses, we have historically always chosen the latter. But
I think anywhere you go in the Middle East or Muslim countries, we do not want democracies. I think Bush II, when he came into office, he was trying to do democracies in these countries, but then realized that that's not going to be good for business.
Well, and not only that, if you have a democracy where everybody gets to vote, you're going to end up with an Islamic republic.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you guys are always underestimating the education of some of the people in the world.
Thank you.
Directly, you just say
you're
it's
probably
Islamic
right.
Republic. That's not true at all. That's not true at all.
Okay.
I mean, besides, what's wrong with the Islamic republics? Like, let's say in Egypt. Look what happened in Egypt.
No, I'm not opposed to that. What I'm saying is, I was saying from the point of view of the Bush administration.
Oh, absolutely, from the point of view. So we end up putting crooks, and our history for that goes back all the way to, even remember Louis Lumumba of the Congo, who was trying to do the best thing for his country. We got rid of him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is that we deliberately go there. We go to countries like Iraq, for instance, or Afghanistan. We pick the guy that was going to do business with us. We throw billions of dollars in the middle of the place, and we expect democracy. Yeah. We're going to get chaos. That's what we want.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said. Thank you, Kusai. Good to hear from you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Let's just process this for a little while here. Let's talk this through. I got to read an ad over on the commercial side. I'll be right back in 1 minute. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So we've got a new video up about the Senate Leadership Fund and the Congressional Leadership Fund, the SLF and the CLF. Nice, innocent-sounding names, right? Leadership funds and Senate and Congress, but they're Republican super PACs that are taking millions and millions of dollars from fossil fuel and other dirty industries and from right-wing billionaires and recycling that money directly into the campaigns. In fact, in several cases, actually running on the ground, get out the vote efforts for Republican members of Congress, running the entire television operation for some of these members of Congress. Lauren Boebert received over $900,000 from the Congressional Leadership Fund so that she could take the 3rd District of Colorado. It's an amazing story. They spent $437 million just in the last election. This is poisoning this money, poisoning our democracy. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mike in Wickliffe, Ohio? Am I saying it right? Hey, Mike, what's up?
That's correct, Tom. Wickliffe, Ohio. Good day to you, sir.
Thank you.
Tom, you gave a great timeline on that, but I think it goes back even further than where you started. Former National Security Advisor to President Carter, Zbigniew Brzezinski, initially started this when the Soviet Union was still in Afghanistan.
Oh, Charlie Wilson's war.
Pardon?
Yeah, are you talking about Charlie Wilson's war? Yeah.
Absolutely.
When I mentioned that in my article, we gave Osama bin Laden $3 billion worth of support to overthrow the Soviets in Afghanistan. We made that man.
Absolutely, and it was accelerated by none other than Ronald Reagan, who referred to these people as freedom fighters.
That's correct.
Now, but another aside to that, I hate to say it, but this country believes in endless wars. It seems to me that our whole economy would collapse if it wasn't for our defense contractors.
It's not our whole economy. It's maybe a fraction of a percent of our economy, Mike, but they are among the most powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C.
Well, let me put it this way. They've convinced our senators and congressmen that it's the major part of our economy.
Well, and they've built defense factories in every single congressional district in the United States has at least one major defense facility. And
absolutely,
that's how they do
it. But to think that you could stay in Afghanistan for even 20 years, which is we fought a full-blown world war in a quarter of that time.
Correct.
And to think that in 20 years you're going to come in and occupy a country, and that's exactly what it was. Just like in Vietnam, we became occupiers.
Right.
And you're going to change their mentality or way of life, and it's not going to happen. Afghanistan is not even a country.
There are two.
It's a series of regions.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and they had no functional military, which is why I think that for Bush it was a no-brainer. Let's bomb the crap out of Afghanistan. But there's a couple of other points. Number one, 9/11 was not an act of war by another nation, or arguably, if it was Saudi Arabia, as we're, more and more information is coming out about the, high Saudi officials being involved in helping plan or fund 9/11, but it had nothing to do with the Afghan government, number one. So it should have been treated as a crime. They should have arrested bin Laden and tried him, number one. There was no justification for a war. And secondly, no country wants to be occupied. We won that war in 3 or 4 weeks. The government fell in a couple of weeks. After that, it was no longer a war, it was an occupation. We have not had a 20-year war in Afghanistan. I realize people have been shooting at each other, but that's what happens in occupations. That's what the British were doing here in the 1700s. After a while, it becomes an occupation, and you can't win an occupation.
Absolutely. And it seems to me that we have the mentality, much like Curtis LeMay, when he said about Vietnam, we'll bomb them back into the Stone Age. And another general spoke up and told him, General, they are in the Stone Age.
Right, and even more so the case in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the second poorest country in the world when George Bush decided to go to war against that country. The average income in that country was $700 a year. Per year.
Yeah.
I mean, it was literally only Burkina Faso was a poorer country at the time, which is still a basket case. But Afghanistan is no longer the second poorest country in the world, purely because of U.S. money being poured into military contractors.
Correct.
And then echoing its way through the economy. So it's like, from my point of view, Mike, we have to figure out, number one, what's the difference between a war and an occupation? I didn't add these things to my op-ed this morning because I think that they're almost an entirely different rant. But what's the difference between a war and an occupation? It's like nobody wants to be occupied. You can't effectively occupy another country.
Right.
It doesn't work. The closest we came to a successful occupation, arguably, was the Philippines, and look where that got us. I mean, Mike, and that was the Spanish-American War. That was 120 years ago. Mike, thank you very much for the call. We'll be back continuing our conversation just on the other side of this break. What lessons can we learn from this? How can we become a better country in the world?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And will the Biden administration push back against all these right-wing talking points that are trying to scrub out Trump's? The Republican Party is scrubbing their website right now of Trump's stuff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today's book. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms, in our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. And we have
Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, back in the after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at thomhartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Lara in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lara, what's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. Sure. Listening to this, I listened to also the BBC at night, and they've been covering a lot of this a lot better than American press. Mm-hmm. But my first instinct is, where is the Afghan government in all this?
There is no such thing.
I know, but I mean, they supposedly have 300,000 troops. Right. Was the count. So first of all, how many people are in the Taliban? How many Taliban forces are there? And is there something hinky going on? Did somebody know something? You kind of came down hard on the Biden administration about letting this happen, but I'm wondering if somebody knew something somewhere, and that's why we're hauling.
Here's what happened, Laura, and I listen to BBC at night too. I listen to their podcasts. That's how I get to sleep every night. And something about British voices puts me to sleep. But I love the accent. But in any case, the reporting was that when Trump cut his deal in 2019 directly with the Taliban, cutting the Afghan government out of the deal altogether over the objections of the remember when he in fact he invited the head of the Taliban to come to right. Camp David on 9/11, which was insane, yes. And the whole world went, what? Yeah. And that was the end of that. But anyhow, when he did that, basically the message that went out to everybody in Afghanistan who was taking a paycheck from the U.S. via the Afghan government, this 350,000 men with guns that were getting a weekly or a monthly paycheck, all of them got the message: keep taking the paycheck. Hey, it's money. But when the Taliban shows up, the U.S. is no longer going to back you up. You're not going to get airstrikes. You're not going to get U.S. soldiers. You're not going to get anything. So just, turn your gun over to the Taliban and say, I'm with you guys now. And which is exactly what happened. And then the other thing that I've only seen reported, I haven't heard it reported once on American television this morning. I only listened for a couple of hours, about an hour CNN, an hour MSNBC. But the other thing was that, but I did hear this in the BBC last night, was that starting in the months after Trump cut that deal with the Taliban back in late 2019, early 2020, the Taliban started going from town to town, meeting with the local militias, the local military forces, the local Afghan government folks, because I mean the Taliban is the people, right? I mean it's to a large extent, yes, it's supported by Pakistan, all that kind of stuff, but and in fact the headquarters of it is in Pakistan, always has been. ISI, the Pakistan Intelligence Service, invented the word Taliban, but nonetheless. These are Afghans. They're people, it's like your neighbors. It's like your friends. And so the people went to their neighbors essentially and said, keep taking that money from America, but, when they finally pull out, just, be with us. And there was like this tacit agreement all across Afghanistan that when the Americans left, we're all going to go with the Taliban because, they ran the country before. They're predictable. If you had a real democracy, people probably wouldn't vote for them. But, it's something. What's the old saying? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And,
yes, exactly.
And the Ghani government was incredibly corrupt. They were living, like kings in a palace, essentially, and, in the green zone in Kabul. And, had no credibility, and no Afghan government has had serious credibility in at least a decade in Afghanistan. I think you could argue that none have had any credibility since we took out the Taliban. So,
was there even a link ever? Was there ever a link? I know when the Soviet Union was occupying Afghanistan, one of the American tactics was to start the Mujahideen.
Correct.
And
in the 80s
to try
with
to
Reagan.
Yes, in the 80s, exactly. It
was called Charlie Wilson's
War. Do you see a line? Yeah, yeah. That's
they made a movie about it.
Yeah, yes, they did. Very good one, actually. I actually thought. Do you see a clear line from that as well,
of
or
course.
do you think that's something?
No, that was when we began basically interfering in Afghanistan. And the Soviets were already getting their ass kicked. I mean, the first, looking back at the history of Afghanistan, it appears to me that the first country to make a serious effort to conquer Afghanistan was about 1,000 years ago, and it was Iran. And they got their butts handed to them. And so, Iran and Afghanistan, two countries in the Middle East that have never been successfully occupied for more than a generation. And, and we're learning the same lesson that the Soviets learned. And before the Soviets, it was, what was it, the French or the British? It was one of the European countries. Say what, Nate?
Yeah, the British were there in I know in the late 1800s. I'm not sure how far the Russians or Soviets were there, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly.
So I mean,
I heard also is the terrain. The terrain is just one of these. There's lots of nooks and crannies, and they can do a lot of just tactically. They have the tactical advantage of the.
It's a mountainous country. Yeah. It's a mountainous country, and it's a very, very poor country. They're very poor in everything except rare earth minerals, which nobody's been able to successfully mine there, although I'm predicting that within a year China will be. But up to this point, nobody's been able to successfully mine those minerals because of, conflict. But my guess is that China's going to come in and offer them the same deal that they're offering all over the rest of Asia and Africa right now, which is we won't involve ourselves in your politics. You can, kill people, you can torture people, you can prevent women from participating. We don't care. We just want the minerals, and in exchange for that, we'll give you a whole pile of cash, which is basically the same deal we made with the Saudis, 70 years ago. And in Saudi Arabia today, people are like, well, what about the women? Well, what about the women in Saudi Arabia? I mean, the situation is not that different, and yet Saudi Arabia is our ally. It's just a fiasco. Laura, I need to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for all your thoughts and for getting me started there on a few things. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? I don't know how we're so gullible, man. We fall for the shiny object all the time. This whole mess with Afghanistan was never going to. These people was never going to throw roses at our feet because we were leaving, and they want to treat us like heroes because we were leaving. That never was going to happen.
Right.
And like you said, the deal was already made. The cake was already baked. They already knew what was going to happen when America left. They made the plan.
Yep.
So these people are hooping and hollering about, you would just cut and run and it don't look good. I don't have no problem with Biden leaving out of there because what they say, 83 million?
Here's the thing that astonishes me, Tyrone, is that for a year, the Taliban has been going, to communities all over Afghanistan saying the Americans are going to leave, and talking to the Afghan military, right? Saying the Americans are going to leave, they no longer have your back, the Afghan government doesn't have enough money to keep paying you, and even if they did, they can't support you. We are going to take over. You have to pick. We'll let you continue to pretend that you're Afghan military, but you've got to be on our side if you and your family want to be safe, and over the long term, because nobody else is going to have your back. And so they set this thing up. And how did we not know that? I can't believe we didn't know that. Was our intelligence that bad? And that's where I'm faulting the Biden administration. They should have started pulling people out of Afghanistan 6 months ago when they first got sworn in. And because we've known for a year and a half that Trump screwed this thing up.
Yeah, I think they knew it. I think that the problem he had was being able to deal with getting them out without the whole thing collapsing right underneath. Now you're closer to the time. Most of the people are already out. The people that
they're not.
Needs
That's
out,
the problem, Tyrone. They're not.
I'm talking about the American soldiers.
Oh, the Americans are out, but the best estimate is that at least 80,000 Afghans have been direct employees of the United States at one point or another in the last 2 years. That's 80,000 people for whom there are records that they worked for us, and who will have a target on their backs and their families' backs. And we have evacuated so far 2,000 of them. That's terrible.
Yeah, it is horrible. That is horrible. And the president ended up leaving. The president of
the president of Afghanistan cut and run yesterday.
So this is the
day before yesterday.
I mean, how you spend all of this money, you put all these resources in there, and these people just and it just collapse all around them, and there's nothing that Biden could have done.
Well, the one thing that he could have done that he's getting all kinds of crap for right now, and I agree with this criticism of him, of this administration, is that they should have gotten the people who worked with us out of the country earlier. I realized that, there was a lot of people who were saying, oh, no, you don't want that many people coming into America or other countries, whatever, bureaucratic BS. But that had to have been handled first. Tyrone, thank you.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And they failed to handle it, and they're going to have to account for it. And about 45 minutes after we get off the air, President Biden's going to give a speech, and I'm guessing he's going to be addressing that very issue. And welcome back. Sue in Sonora, California. Hey, Sue, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. It's been a while since I've talked to you, but what I wanted to mention is something that hasn't really been mentioned a lot, and that is just the horrible fate of all of the women in Afghanistan, because this was never going to work, whether we were there for a year or there for a million years, because I think most of the men in that country actually are okay with the Taliban.
Yeah.
And the fact that, the guys here that run our government are saying, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen. It's because, they're guys.
We've got probably 20% of the men in America who would be happy with that kind of a situation. They're out there protesting women's rights.
I know, and I'm lucky to live in this country, as screwed up as it is right now, because, I remember all of this. I'm 70 years old. I know what we had to go through here, and let's give maybe us the one positive thing that we wanted to do there was maybe, bring all of this to them that we have, but it was ridiculous of us to think we could do that.
I do think the one small upside to all this, Sue, and it's buried in blood, so it's hard to call it an upside, but I think it's real, and that is that for at least a decade and arguably longer, we have been running schools for girls all around Afghanistan, and so you've got a generation of young of girls right now who are going to be young women, within a decade, who are not going to forget that, and who are literate. And that's going to be a force. And it's going to take some time. It's going to be a while, but I mean, this is what Saudi Arabia is dealing with. I mean, you know, women being able to go to school and become literate just became a thing in Saudi Arabia in the last generation or two. I don't recall the year, but you know, within our lifetime, you know, women used to be banned from school in Saudi Arabia. Now they can go to school, and once people get educated, they start saying, "Hey, wait a minute, I want a piece of this action." And so I think that, you know, we've planted some seeds that will grow in a positive way and start reducing the power of the patriarchy. But, you know, hey, it wasn't until 1920 in the United States that women even got the right to vote.
You're right. I know how hard it is. And it's like all these women are going to suffer over there, and it's their country. There's not a whole lot we can do from here. And we gave them that, you know, bit of glimmer of hope. But I don't know whether that's, you know, that's kind of sad in a way, because
it is.
I don't know whether they're going to run with it.
I don't think that you're going to see a women's movement tomorrow morning challenging the Taliban.
No.
I mean, you know, these are vicious men with guns. But you know, over time, I hope.
You're such an optimist. Thank you.
I don't know what the alternative is, Sue. I mean, you know, it's like
I feel so bad for those women. I
do too.
So bad.
I really do, and for the children who are growing up, and you know, particularly the girls. It's going to be.
They shouldn't blame Biden, because it wouldn't matter whether we got it, whether we were there another year or not.
No, as the British defense minister said, the die was cast when Trump cut the deal with the Taliban. That's when this, and Trump is scrubbing this off his website, and the GOP is scrubbing it off their website right now. I've retweeted.
Yeah, well, they're evil, so what can you say?
What can you say? Sue, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back in 1 minute. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's this one's a geeky science one. And it's about this little snippet of genetic material, what's called microRNA. And the name of this one is called MIR1, M-I-R-1. And we've known for years that when muscles are used, when I'm talking about, you know, exercise to the point where you feel fatigue in your muscles, that when exercises are when muscles are exercised, it depletes them of MIR1. What they didn't know is where that MIR1 goes and what it does. And it turns out that our fat cells draw the MIR1 in from the muscles, and it causes the fat cells to start converting themselves into fatty acids that can be used to feed the muscles. So we're not just building muscle, but we're also reducing fat in our body. It's absolutely fascinating. Go into depth on it in this new video. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Daryl in Norcross, Georgia. Correction? What's that?
Yes, it could be a correction, but it's an addendum. You said the Syrians, the nation that went into Afghanistan.
No, I said the Persians,
true,
the Iranians.
Persians, okay.
Yeah, but I could have been wrong. Then. I know Alexander the Great did too.
Yes, that's it. Alexander the Great, you know, everybody knows Alexander. He was going all around taking over stuff. His army went in there, and a little less than half of them came back out, Tom.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the story of Afghanistan. So, yeah. Daryl, thank you.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. You wanted to add something? Oh, Daryl just hung up. Okay. Carol in Meridian, Connecticut. It says you disagree with me, Carol. What's up?
Well, I don't disagree with you entirely, but I am really incensed that we didn't get those Afghans out of Kabul.
I agree.
There's no reason why we didn't get them out of there. And if we are afraid of having all those Muslims or brown people or whatever we're afraid of, they didn't have to come all to this country. Guam offered to take them. There was mention of Qatar. And I'm sure we could have gone to other countries to take some, but we didn't apparently have the will to do anything to take them out of there. And I called my senator who's on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I told him we should impeach Biden and let Kamala Harris run this country because he can't. And that's all I want to tell you. What do you think?
I don't think this is something you impeach Biden over, but I do think it's something that Lloyd Austin, our defense secretary, and Tony Blinken, our secretary of state, might legitimately lose their jobs over. This was, because they're the ones who were advising Biden. They were the ones who were supposed to be gathering the intelligence, and perhaps the director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
That's even better.
I don't have that person's name off the top of my head, but we should have known. I mean, if the BBC is reporting this, you would think that the American intelligence community knew that starting a year and a half ago, after Trump cut the deal with the Taliban and cut the Afghan government out of that deal, that the Taliban would then go all over Afghanistan and say, hey, just, stay cool, but when we make our move, drop your guns and join us. And that's exactly what happened, which is why it seemed so lightning quick. And how did we not know that? I mean, how did we not get our people out in the first place? It just boggles my mind. I share your outrage, Carol. Carol, I've got to move on. Thank you. Ron in Chicago. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Yes, the Afghan military had an air force and was never used against the Taliban. And the Taliban never had an air force, so I didn't understand.
They will soon. I think that the Afghan government didn't use their air force because the Afghan government was a Potemkin village. It was a charade. It was a pretend government. It's a terrible thing. It's an absolutely terrible thing. Thank you, Ron. Ronnie in Orange County, California. Hey, Ronnie, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. I just want to go right off and say Orange County, California, we've been blue for the last 2 cycles. And, of course, everybody knows that we are looking at fighting the removal of our duly elected governor. And hopefully Orange County remains blue for the 3rd election cycle.
Yeah. Well, let's hope enough people show up. I mean, if Californians show up in the same numbers that they do for a regular election, Gavin Newsom is safe, but that's typically not what happens in special elections.
Yes, and thank you for telling everybody about Elizabeth Warren because she's throwing a lot of money into California, and I'm seeing ads. Normally, California doesn't see ads because the election is already settled in the South, and you know the way the election runs from the East to the West.
Yeah,
but thank you for alerting us.
But, Ronnie, you wanted, I'm looking at the clock here. We got about a minute. You wanted to mention Barbara Lee. I think that she deserves a lot of credit right now.
Cheers. I spent 8 years in the Air Force in England, so I love that English voice as well. Barbara Lee, this goes to the top of your show when you ask, how do we stop stupid wars? And it is supporting people like Barbara Lee, who was dealing with a big lie. Now, we talk about the big lie today, but she was definitely dealing with a big lie. Wouldn't you agree?
She was the only person in the House of Representatives who voted no. Now, what I don't remember is if that was Afghanistan or Iraq or both. Do you?
Actually, I believe she voted for Iraq, okay? Because remember, Afghanistan was a second thought. Because you had mentioned that earlier, you weren't sure which way we went first. Of course, you do know that we did go Iraq first.
No,
and that
we
was
went
about
into
the oil.
Afghanistan in October of 2001, and we went into Iraq in the spring of 2003.
Yeah, Afghanistan was secret troops. We went full-blown war in Iraq. I'm talking about full-blown war.
That was just a month after 9/11. That was Bush.
True enough.
That was Bush going, beating his chest and saying, "I'm getting revenge."
Roger that.
And this was not an act of war by Afghanistan. This was a crime by a criminal organization that was being run by Osama bin Laden. And he should have been in a court of law and in a prison. And but that's, again, hindsight is always 20/20. Ronnie, thank you for the call. We'll be back. We'll continue our conversation. Actually, I have no guests for the 3 hours today. I just wanted to discuss this with you. We'll continue processing this and our thoughts on it. There's like so many levels to this. There's, the screw up around getting people out that have worked with us and the multiple forces, the cross currents around that. There's being lied into wars. There's what was 9/11 after all? Was it an act of war?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Food Revolution by Ocean Robbins.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And in addition to Afghanistan, which is mostly what we've been talking about today, and I'm pretty sure is probably mostly what we're going to continue talking about for the next 2 hours. And by the way, I checked, Barbara Lee was the only person in the House of Representatives in 2001, in October of 2001, to vote against the authorization to use military force, which is what every president has used ever since 9/11 to justify, you know, military actions in half a dozen countries around the world or more, and needs to be taken down. That AUMF needs to be nuked. But anyhow, that's what's going on. If you're just tuning in, just to recap, obviously Kabul has fallen. What we have learned in the last few days, or what I learned from BBC reporting, I have not heard this much on the American media, but it's all over the international news, is that in 2019, when Donald Trump was president of the United States, looking at his re-election in 2020, this was pre-COVID, you'll recall, he wanted to be able to claim that he had ended the war in Afghanistan. He went to the Taliban. First, he went to Pakistan and said, please release this guy, this mullah, who is now the he is now the president of Afghanistan. He claimed that. His name is Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, or Baradar. So Pakistan let him out of jail at Donald Trump's request. And then Donald Trump later said, you know, had an actual phone conversation with this guy, half-hour phone conversation with this guy. And basically, we gave the Taliban, or Trump gave the Taliban everything they wanted. He gave them credibility. He invited them to Camp David. He ended up withdrawing from that, you know, undoing that invitation because it did not play well on the world stage. It was right before 9/11. This was August, I believe, of 2019. But he gave them essentially an unconditional surrender. He said that by May, the 1st of May of 2021, of this year, all U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan. And the country will be yours, Mr. and Mrs. Mr. Taliban, that's all there is, Mr. Taliban. Country will be yours. That's what Donald Trump told them. And so what happened was and this was a year and a half ago, right? That almost 2 years ago, that was a cue to all of the Afghan soldiers that we were paying that something's coming down the road, you better get ready. The New York Times has a subhead today on their front page about how the U.S. intelligence and the U.S. military thought it would take 30 to 90 days for Kabul, for the whole Afghan government to fall. It took less than a week. Why? Because it really did take 30 to 90 days. Actually, it took about a year and a half. What happened was when Trump publicly announced, and by the way, Trump has now, you know, he's scrubbing this stuff off his website, and the RNC has already scrubbed his statements off their website, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. But, you know, Trump came out and said, that's it, we are out of here. This is the statement from Donald Trump that has been scrubbed from his website. And this was a recent one. He said, I wish Joe Biden wouldn't use September 11 as the date to withdraw our troops from Afghanistan for two reasons. First, we can and should get out earlier. 19 years is enough. In fact, far too much and way too long. I made early withdrawal possible by already pulling much of our billions of dollars of equipment out and, more importantly, reducing our military presence to fewer than 2,000 troops from the 16,000 level that was there. Secondly, September 11 represents a very sad event and period for our country and should remain a day of reflection and remembrance honoring those great souls we lost. Getting out of Afghanistan is a wonderful and positive thing to do. I plan to withdraw on May 1st, and we should keep as close to that schedule as possible. This is something that Trump tweeted, a statement by Donald J. Trump earlier this year, after Biden became president. And now you've got, you know, these right-wingers just, you know, all over the place. The America First Policy Institute. This is a pro-Trump think tank that has popped up, and they're quoting the former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe under Trump, basically blaming everything on Biden. They say President Trump personally engaged with Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, who led the Taliban delegation and clearly laid out what would happen. They understood and respected this approach because we had established credible deterrence in the preceding year, which is why there was no U.S. soldiers killed in Afghanistan in the final 11 months we were in office. Well, there were no soldiers killed in Afghanistan because Trump cut a deal with the Taliban. He said, we'll give you the country if you'll just stop shooting at Americans. Make it look good for me. I'm up for re-election here. And what happened when Trump cut that deal, as the British Defense Secretary pointed out this morning on the BBC, what happened was that all across Afghanistan, Afghan soldiers who were getting a paycheck, from the United States via the Afghan government, those 300,000, 350,000 plus soldiers, had been approached over the course of the previous year and a half since Trump cut that deal. Let's keep in mind, Joe Biden has only been in office, 7 months? They were approached by the Taliban all across the country who said, stay cool, keep pretending you're the Afghan military, keep taking that money from America, but there's going to be a day, it's going to be coming, probably in August of 2021, there's going to be a day when we rise up, and we're going to do it all across the country all at once. And then just lay down your arms, and we will not kill you and your families. Everything will be good. And the BBC is reporting this. I'm not hearing it on American media much. There's an occasional reference to it. But there's a reason why it only took a week for the entire country to collapse. What I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is how our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, didn't know this. It should have been obvious. Donald Trump declared everybody's going to leave a year and a half ago. What he really was saying to the Afghan army was, nobody's going to have your back going forward. You are on your own. And here comes the Taliban. What are you going to do? Hey, we're going to get in with the Taliban. I mean, who wants to die? I really believe there's a lot of blame to go around here. And it's going to be very interesting to hear what President Biden has to say, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours from now. It's scheduled for around 3:30, actually, this afternoon. He's going to give a speech from the White House. I think he's just now returned to the White House. But, you know, this is, by the way, probably what made Jerry Ford a one-term president, was his getting us out of Vietnam. And that iconic picture of those people hanging on to the wheels of the helicopter, falling off the helicopter as the last helicopter took off from the top of the U.S. Air Force Base in Saigon. Now we've got people falling off airplanes, C-130s, as, you know, American planes. It's the exact same thing. And in both cases, it was a failure of our government to protect the people who had been with us. And I get it. You know, I'm guessing that at a certain point, the Biden administration was thinking, you know, how many people do we take out of the country? I mean, if we take 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, 80,000, the number I'm hearing is that there are around 80,000 people who have been directly employed by the United States in the last couple of years, who therefore have targets on their backs. We have taken 2,000 of them out of the country. How did we not take out the rest of them earlier, and their families? How did we not see this coming? Trump announced this almost 2 years ago when he cut the deal with the Taliban over the objections of the Afghan government. He cut the government out of the deal. He made a deal with terrorists. In fact, he asked Pakistan to let their leader out of jail. And we are now reaping what we sowed. And then, of course, you know, go back to 2001. How did all this start? It all started with a criminal act against the United States that George W. Bush decided to treat as an act of war. And he had to go after a country. I mean, who was behind 9/11? Well, it turns out if any country had any involvement in it, and I don't think that we've successfully pinned this on any individual government, but it looks like there were some fairly well-placed people in the Saudi government who had something to do with support of some of the people who were involved in it. But the planning was done in Germany by Mohammed Atta, and in Venice, Florida, when Mohammed Atta came to the United States and finally, you know, put the deal together. We've got Atta. He's in prison over this. What did Afghanistan have to do with it? As far as I can tell, nothing. Bin Laden had his little terrorist training camp there. He had 20,000 people go through it over the previous 10 or 15 years. And there were about 5,000 people there hanging out with him at the time, although on 9/11, he was in Pakistan getting dialysis. Anyhow, where do we go from here? What do we do with this? And I'm not even sure, you know, the politics of this thing, but I'm not even sure how to phrase how we should deal with the messages that are coming out of, you know, Republican partisans, people like Mike Rogers on CNN this morning. You know, oh, this is Biden's fault. Excuse me? Well, no, Trump did the right thing. Really?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And, you know, I'll put it right up front. I'm a partisan, but I'm also critical of both sides of this. But this really, we got lied into a war we shouldn't have been lied into. Okay, and welcome back. Corky in Rochester, oops, click the button there. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I don't understand how nobody could see this coming.
I don't either.
I mean, just had enough information, there's a freight train on it.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter who is president. When the minute you started pulling troops out of there, see, the farmers
well, that's why Trump didn't pull them out. That's why Trump set it up for May of 2021.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You see, anybody that had a farm over there, when the Americans come over and took over security, they went back to their farms.
Mm-hmm.
And then the minute the Taliban come back, then they grabbed their arms and went to war with them.
Right, right.
I mean, it just doesn't seem complicated to me.
No, it doesn't to me either. And you know, it's... like I said, I think heads are going to roll at the State Department and the Defense Department and some of the intelligence agencies. And if they don't, there's at the very least, there needs to be a serious investigation into how did we get this intelligence so wrong. Corky.
We didn't get it wrong.
Well, then how did the execution get so badly done? Who was responsible for that?
Well, the Trump administration covered it all up. And Bush and Biden, he come in trying to straighten it all out because he had said back when he was vice president, we got to get out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And so we knew where he was coming from.
Yep.
And so it was all set up.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Corky, thank you for the call. Tom in Lone Missouri. Hey, Tom, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey. Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
I agree with everything that's been said pretty much today on your program about Afghanistan, and I appreciate the in-depth conversation that you typically have on any subject. One thing I haven't heard is where the funding for the Taliban comes from. This isn't the same ragtag, yeah, well, that may be it. This isn't the same ragtag organization as when Bush lied us into that war.
Right.
If you look at the way they're dressed today, the level of armaments they have. Now, I realize they stole a bunch of ours.
Right.
But, I mean, I'd like to follow the money. You know, who's funding these
We
guys?
give big bucks to Pakistan. Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, invented the Taliban decades ago. The Taliban was, like, for them, what some of the paramilitary forces, you know, that you see in Lebanon and whatnot are to those folks. Arguably how Hamas started, but you know, with regard to Iran, you know, hey, let's fund some guys who are kind of on our side but aren't in our country, and so the Pakistan funded the Taliban, and I don't have specific evidence on this, and I'm not an authority on this, so don't take my word to the bank, Tom, but I believe that most of the funding for the Taliban either came directly from Pakistan or came indirectly via America through the Afghan government that's just insanely corrupt and infiltrated.
Well, insane is the proper term. That's indeed.
There you go.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you for the
Thanks,
call.
Tom.
Yeah, nice to hear from you. 21 minutes past the hour. We're processing, right? We're watching this human disaster in real time happening right in front of our eyes and trying to figure out how can we derive some meaning and some lessons from this. Back with your calls after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So we have over at HartmannReport.com my daily rant, which you can find there. And over at thomhartmann.com, we have the free newsletter, which lists every single website, gives you hot links right out to every single website for every single story that I talk about throughout the program during the course of the day. And then, of course, also at thomhartmann.com, we've got our weekly video that we put up. And the one this week is kind of mind-boggling. It turns out, if you remember back when Anthony Kennedy resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court right after Trump made remarks about his son Justin, who had signed off on $1 billion worth of loans from Deutsche Bank to Donald Trump, Kennedy resigned, and Brett Kavanaugh was nominated by Trump. And Christine Blasey Ford said he was, essentially guilty of sexual assault. All kinds of tips went to the FBI, and we have just found out what happened to those tips. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're doing just kind of, today, I think for most of the show, there are other issues, and I'll just mention a couple of them very briefly, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. In Texas, the all-Republican Texas Supreme Court has said that the Republican Governor Greg Abbott's order that schools may not mandate masks is consistent with the Texas Constitution, and it stands. And you've got some school districts, particularly in Dallas, saying, screw the governor, we're going to mandate masks. And it's going to get very weird. And in Florida, the deaths, all across the South, and in red state after red state after red state, we are watching hospitals fill up, ICU units filling up, children's hospitals filling up. We've got our own humanitarian disaster happening right here in the United States as a result of the Republican strategy of let's sow chaos to make Biden look bad and to hurt the economy. And they're killing their own people in the process. I really don't. I think they miscalculated. I don't think they thought that the COVID was going to be this bad, the Delta variant. So we've got that going on too. But trying to make sense out of what happened with Afghanistan, how we got in there in the first place. Why wouldn't George Bush? He started out saying, give us bin Laden to Afghanistan. They said, prove that he's behind 9/11. Bush said, screw that, I'm going to bomb you guys. They came back 2 weeks later after the bombing started. They came back and said, okay, we're ready to give bin Laden to a third country. Bush said, nope, I want a war. And here we are. Here we are. What do we do with this? How do we understand this? Bob in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I'm really glad to have you here on a Monday morning. The news this whole weekend was just devastating and slanted and really pissing me off. But one of the main things, it seems like, the talking heads all weekend were just in an uproar on how Biden is going to allow these women and children to be raped and tortured and murdered and have the kids armed to make them into soldiers. And not a word from them. Still, when the same thing is happening south of us and those same women and children are fleeing as refugees to get away from that same situation. And what do? We send them right back, or we lock up their kids. Where was the outrage from those same... You're
talking about Nicaragua and Honduras? Or Guatemala and Honduras, rather? And Nicaragua, too.
Yeah, no concern with those women and kids, but they've got this opportunity now to blame Joe Biden and say he's going to allow these women and children to be raped and murdered and kids into armies. And, it's so frustrating.
I think it's possible to be outraged at both, and I don't think that, I'm not quite so ready as you, Bob, to be so critical about selective outrage. What's happening in Afghanistan is an absolute disaster. And they should have seen this coming in the Biden administration. They should have seen this coming because Trump set this up. When Trump cut a deal, when he ordered Pakistan to release the leader of the Taliban, and he cut a deal with the guy who yesterday declared himself president of Afghanistan, and he cut out the Afghan government, this was predictable. Bob, thank
You're
you.
listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And if I can figure that out, why can't Anthony Blinken or Lloyd Austin or our intelligence community or Joe Biden for that?
We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon, War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out, hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. Welcome back. Okay, just to recap, just to touch on some of these things. Number one, when will we stop letting presidents lie us into wars? We've covered that, and I want to get back to that conversation in just a minute. But I am not hearing anybody in the mainstream media talking about how is it that we ended up in Afghanistan in the first place. Oh, 9/11. But wait a minute. Oh, and earlier I said we had Mohammed Atta. That was actually Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I mixed up my Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and my Mohammed Atta was one of the hijackers who died. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the guy who was planning and running the operation out of Pakistan. Not Afghanistan, Pakistan. But Bush didn't want to bomb Pakistan. Pakistan's got a huge army. They got an air force. They're trying to have nukes. They're our ally. We send them money. So anyhow, there's that. When are we going to stop letting our presidents lie us into wars? Number two, you've got Donald Trump out here saying that Joe Biden has surrendered America with regard to both Afghanistan and COVID. Well, Trump set up both these disasters. Trump set up the Afghanistan disaster in 2019 by demanding that Pakistan let the terrorist leader of the Taliban out of prison and then directly negotiating with that guy, inviting him to Camp David, directly negotiating with that guy over the opposition of the Afghan government. And then when he was done with the negotiations, publicly announcing that on May 1st of 2021, America was going to completely pull all our troops out of Afghanistan. And he said that back in 2019. This was part of his re-election campaign strategy. And the deal he cut with the Taliban is, we will hand the country over to you if you'll stop shooting at American soldiers for the rest of my presidency. Trump just, was just bragging. The last 11 months I was president, not a single soldier died. Well, that's because he told the Taliban, we'll give you the country. So, number one, Trump, who is trying to blame Joe Biden for this thing, frankly, I think most of the blame for this disaster in a larger context rests with George W. Bush, who got us into it stupidly, although it was very profitable for Dick Cheney, whose company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Donald Trump. Although, obviously the execution of getting our people out has been badly flawed. But so anyhow, Trump is saying that Biden screwed up two things, that and COVID. Well, how did Biden screw up COVID? He's trying to get people vaccinated. And you've got, these crazy right-wing governors who are saying, no, you must send your children to school where they can't wear masks, or they're going to hang out with people who refuse to wear masks. And so your kids are going to come home with COVID, so you're going to get COVID, so good luck. It's like this is Trump's death cult. And they're trying to blame it all on Joe Biden. Is it going to stick? I don't know. It's a very, very good question. And then finally, is Greg Abbott actually going to start throwing children or teachers in jail for mandating masks in Texas? You've got school districts who are standing up to him saying, we are going to, we don't want to die. You had 4 teachers die in one day in Georgia last week. 4 teachers in one day. So are these Republicans going to get away with this? I honestly don't know the answer to that question, which is such an astonishing thing, given the nature of everything, of this country and everything else that's going on. That, is it possible that a governor could just lead their people to COVID death like lambs to slaughter and then get reelected? And then be the hero? The whole thing. I mean, you stack these things up, and it's just breathtaking. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, let me say first that my remarks today are not intended to be directed toward you specifically or about anything that you're saying, but you just take them, receive them how you may. But I think this entire discussion on a national level over the past week about pulling out of Afghanistan is a big, hypocritical American political football game.
Past week, we've been having this conversation for 2 years.
No, we haven't. No, that's exactly the point. That's exactly my point. Nobody cares about this because we don't know anything about it. 6 months ago, 2 years ago, if you'd asked somebody, what do you think about what's going on in Afghanistan? They say, I don't know. Are we still there? You see, we haven't had the nightly news footage of, the war in Afghanistan drags on. Look at the dead. Look at the people.
Yeah. Now we've got the pictures and everybody's freaked out. I get it.
Yeah. Now everybody has an opinion. Oh, Biden shouldn't have done this. Is all we make this war out that's 12,000 miles away. We make this all out to be. It's all about us. It's all about Biden and Trump and who got us in there.
Paul, it was several weeks ago that a number of shows on MSNBC, which is pretty much all I've been watching lately in the evening for primetime news, particularly Rachel Maddow, started having people on the air talking about how we've got to get our translators out of that country. We've got to get the people who've worked with us and for us out of that country. We've got to do it now. And the Biden administration was not moving forward. The State Department was moving very slow on processing the paperwork. Rachel was, on air wondering out loud if there were Trump holdovers in the State Department who were screwing this thing up. I mean, there is going to be a reckoning. There's going to be a cleaning up of this. But if your point is that hey, it's a distant country and Americans don't care, yeah, okay, point made.
Yeah, but no, wait. The thing is, we don't know. Okay, I watch Rachel every night. I've seen all that. But I'm saying that's been relatively recently. And I'm saying in the last 20 years, as a country, we haven't learned a damn thing more about Afghanistan than we ever knew before.
Right, and that would be very different if we had a draft, by the way.
We don't know anything more about the culture. We don't know anything about the people there. You know, the other thing I want to point out is that we call the Taliban the terrorists. No, they're not. Al-Qaeda was the terrorist. Taliban has not been held responsible for any terrorist action. They might be a right-wing, extremist Wahhabi paramilitary group that are not nice guys, but they're not terrorists. That's not. We don't know of any terrorist acts that they have committed.
If you were a Christian or a Jew or even a Shia, a Muslim in Afghanistan, you would have a very different definition of the Taliban.
I'm not saying they're nice guys, but we make this all about we're in there for what reason? Because of 9/11. I think you pointed this out. This was really a Dick Cheney special to raid them of their rare earth minerals. That's really the only reason we ever got in there. I don't think it ever had anything to do with terrorism. But the fact of the matter is, Tom, America doesn't really know much more about 9/11 than we did right after 9/11. We haven't had a deep dive into that. We've never had a deep dive into Afghanistan or who the people are, what we're doing there. We want everything to be so insular, and now all of a sudden everybody's upset about pulling out of there. And by the way, Tom, this whole thing about people hanging out, this is the same thing that happened in Saigon in '75, people hanging out of the helicopters, and the commentary about, the Afghans, as soon as we pull out, they just drop their guns. Same thing we said about the South Vietnamese. It's all a blame the other country. When our foreign policy fails, we blame them. It's a bunch of hypocritical crap. It really is.
Okay, I'm with you. I can't dispute any of that, Paul. Thank you very much. Emmett in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Emmett, what's on your mind today?
Oh, thanks for taking my call. Well, I've been watching with interest. It's a fascinating discussion. This doesn't surprise me either, but it should have. Just to start out, I'm not Democrat or Republican. I'm an independent voter. And from this conversation that we're having, it looks like there have been mistakes made by the Biden administration and the Trump administration. But I've often thought, what would I do if this was an Emmett administration? What would I do? What would you do? This war has gone on for so long. I would have wanted to pull out as well, and I would have pulled out as well myself. I would have had, talked to my advisors, my military advisors, and said, we've trained the Afghan army. Can't they stand on their own 2 feet? We can't be the policemen of the world. And I probably would have pulled out, and it might have been the same thing. Everyone makes mistakes. If this was your administration, you would have made mistakes. If this had been my administration,
we never should have been there in the first place, Emmett. That was my, the whole point of my rant today and of the op-ed that I published, that was titled, "When Are We Going to Stop Letting Presidents Lie Us into Wars?"
Yeah.
Is that, we shouldn't have been there in the first place.
That makes so much sense. Spot on.
9/11 was not Pearl Harbor. George W. Bush wanted it to be Pearl Harbor, and it that in Iraq helped him get reelected in 2004, which was really, in my mind, what this was all about for him. But it was not Pearl Harbor. Afghanistan did not take those towers down. It was a guy. It was a guy named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed who was running that operation. It was funded by a multimillionaire, a Saudi multimillionaire by the name of Osama bin Laden. And
fascinating.
Go ahead.
Also, a couple of more points. I know we have other callers, but one, this was a guerrilla warfare with the Afghans because they know that terrain, the mountains.
Well, it's not just guerrilla warfare. That's what happens when you have occupations. This was the complaint the British had about the American patriots, whatever you call. They called us terrorists. Because we were shooting from behind trees. We wouldn't march in line in formation. And that's, people who are occupied are going to do whatever they can to get the occupiers the hell out of their country. And that's been going on for 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, by the way. And I'm telling you, there's a reckoning coming with Iraq as well. But, Emmett, I got to run. I'm sorry. But, your point was well made. 47 minutes past the hour. We're just trying to make some sense out of all this stuff. And have a clear-eyed understanding of it with a little less partisan filter.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'll be right back with more of your calls in just a few minutes. And welcome back. Carl in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Carl, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm really upset and kind of concerned with what I've been seeing the last few days. We could spend, and you have spent already a couple hours, and probably will be a lot more time spent discussing the major problem or question: should we have pulled out or should we have stayed, and so on, and the historical issue of how did we get there in the first place, and who do we blame? What I'm really more concerned about as an operational planner is I didn't think politically we would see the Biden administration doing a similar tactic for the last 4 years: divert, divide, and dissemble. And every time I've heard anybody online, I particularly like to watch Rachel, who doesn't ask a lot of questions but offers a lot of historical, factual knowledge. But every time we talk about, well, why did this happen? How's this going? Why is it so bad? All the terrible questions that have to do with right now, today, an operational problem. I had gunnery sergeants and master sergeants work for me in the Marine Corps as log chiefs that could have developed a better plan to do this. I know Biden inherited it from that moron that he took the place of. However, somebody, somewhere, and I think it's primarily State Department. I do have a 30-year history in the military, so I'm prone not to blame Austin and the military quite as much, because although they input to plans, they basically are operationalized. Their job is to get it done. They don't plan. The State Department is where we look.
But the DoD has a huge internal defense intelligence agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency. It's called DIA, and they should know what the hell was going on there.
Oh, yeah, of course they do. Yeah, I served with them. I know about the DIA. But I'm telling you right now that why every time everybody talks, are we getting diverted back to, well, they inherited the problem. It was a good decision. We know we have to get out. The American people want us out. That isn't the issue. That isn't the issue at all. We could take months, years, decades talking about should we or should we not, how did we historically get in, and so on. What I'm concerned about is the moral failure, just like Trump failed when he turned the Kurds, who did 90% of the fighting in Syria, over to the Turks. Him and his buddy that runs Turkey. We may not have to worry about how do we prevent this ever from happening in the future. I'm not sure if we continue this process of going in with nation building or rebuilding as a goal that we'll have anybody who wants to ally themselves with us, because we have such a strong history of failing. I've had staff sergeants, gunnery sergeants who could plan a better withdrawal plan. And by the way, we didn't stick to May. We didn't stick to June. We didn't stick to any month at all that Trump declared was the deadline. We could have picked any time reasonably in the near future and planned properly to get this done step by step, logically, and get those that we had a moral and continue to have a moral obligation to protect out of it. Now we're struggling and straining and fighting and running and yelling and people jumping on planes just to get our own weenie diplomats out of there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's a tough one, Carl. It's a tough one. I don't think there's any clear, easy answers or solutions here. This is a very, very complex situation. There was, it's an original sin, the war itself in the first place, that has been compounded over and over and over across 4 administrations. Carl, thank you for your call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Victor in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Victor, what's on your mind today? Victor?
He did a lot of good things.
Victor?
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air, Victor.
Hey, good talking to you, Tom. You got a lot of this stuff about everything right. But I think Biden should deserve the Medal of Honor, and so should everyone connected with the administration. Like you said, that we didn't know what deal that Trump made with the Taliban.
Oh, we did know. He announced it. We did know. He announced it. He bragged about it.
We didn't know the particulars and the details of exactly what
we did.
Until much later.
No, that's not true. In 2019, we knew that Trump had cut a deal with the Taliban where they would no longer shoot at American forces. In exchange for that, he would turn the country over to them on May 1st of 2021 if he was still president, if he got reelected.
Right. But that didn't happen.
We knew that.
But it's still anytime we get involved with a war in the Middle East, it's going to be almost impossible to get out of.
I think anytime we get in a war, involved in any war anywhere, if particularly if we're trying to get into the middle of, a domestic situation of some kind, like with Vietnam.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? We don't have to worry about Americans getting into being harmed by the Taliban because they don't want Americans in Afghanistan. They'll pay for Americans to leave Afghanistan. They're not going to shoot or kill anybody, because then Biden will be forced to retaliate.
Right.
So, that
they just want to run their country, right? This is like, I was hearing again this morning, all this, now you're going to have a whole generation of young people who are going to grow up to be terrorists and hate America. Well, it wasn't angry Afghans who came after us on 9/11. It was wealthy Saudis. And in fact, if you look at those 19 or 17, however many it was, who were flying the airplanes and taking down the planes, they were all middle class and upper middle class guys.
Yeah.
I mean,
they were Saudi nationals.
Yeah, and most of them, there was 2 or 3 who weren't Saudi nationals, but it was almost all, it was a bunch of Saudis, and they had a lot of money and they had a lot of backing, and it had nothing to do with Afghanistan.
No, and the only reason why Bush wanted to make war with Afghanistan is because he wanted desperately to get Osama bin Laden himself, and intelligence said that Osama was in Afghanistan, and he was for a long time.
I don't think he wanted to get Osama bin Laden. He let him go in Tora Bora.
I know, but that's what he said publicly, but privately, he was desperate to get Osama bin Laden.
I think he was just desperate to get his popularity ratings up.
Osama bin Laden was behind the 9/11.
George W. Bush was below 50% in the approval ratings in September of 2001 because his daddy's appointee to the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, had cast the deciding vote, putting him in the White House, and everybody knew it. And so Trump was desperately looking for an opportunity to be credible, to be relevant, to be a hero. And he thought that if he could turn 9/11 into some kind of Pearl Harbor, as if some other country had attacked us, when it wasn't a country, it was a guy worth $600 million, Osama bin Laden, out of who was based out of Afghanistan, yes, but it was operationally run by Sheikh Khalid Mohammed out of Pakistan, and it was planned in Germany and in Venice, Florida. But
that is all true. But also, I think you were a little bit harsh on Johnson, because Johnson, he was just a political
Johnson
animal
lied
in the Senate.
about the Gulf of Tonkin. You know, that is, and I realize Robert McNamara was the one who started that lie, and within a few weeks, LBJ learned that it was a lie, but he went along with that lie, and friends of mine died. I'm not going to let that go, Victor.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. Sally Roche Wagner.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. The Associated Press is reporting, there's a good piece about it over at The Hill right now, that the United States government has just reached a deal in Doha with the leadership of the Taliban, that we can use the airports without being, without any conflict, without being shot at, to export as many people as we want, in exchange for our not using our military force to basically kill a bunch of Taliban people, fighters, whatever, that, of reviving the conflict. And, from the point of view of the Taliban, this makes a lot of sense. Let's just let these guys get the hell out of our country, and if they're going to take some of our people with them, good riddance. I'm assuming that that's their perspective. If so, that's probably good news, and it's probably good news that will be reported by the president in an hour and a half when he gives his speech to the nation. that don't worry, we're going to get this under control, things are going to calm down, you know, the Taliban's going to help us or whatever. I mean, it's now the government of Afghanistan. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with these people. How about starting a mass vaccination program in Afghanistan? You know, maybe it's, people go, oh my God, you're talking about dealing with the Taliban. We deal with the Saudi government. The Saudi government is brutal to its citizens, doesn't allow any sort of, dissent. They're brutal toward women. We deal with the government of the United Arab Emirates. Hell, they gave Jared Kushner $1 billion. And, you know, these are not liberal democracies. So, you know, if the Taliban is now running, I mean, Donald Trump turned Afghanistan over to the Taliban 2 years ago. He just put a 2-year tail on it, that's all. And it's happening right now. So we're going to, I think, personally, I think that we're going to have to swallow our pride and deal with this as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Now, I realize I'm probably way ahead of where America's at on this, and nobody even wants to talk about this right now. And maybe it's a conversation for, you know, later in the week or next week. But there's this thing, you know, we've tried hard power. There's this thing called soft power. We have tried hard power. We've tried military force for 20 years, and you cannot occupy a country with military force. People will always fight back. It is the story of the American Revolution. It's the story of our occupation of Vietnam. It's the story of you know, occupations all over the world. Ultimately, the British occupation of India. And they got taken down, by the way, and they were trying to occupy India using hard power, and they got taken down by Gandhi's soft power. Nonviolent resistance. Now, in the case of Afghanistan, I mean, obviously it was violent resistance, but bottom line, you can't occupy a country. So at what point do we try soft power? Soft power is you provide food, you provide aid. Afghanistan is sitting on an estimated $3 trillion worth of rare earth minerals and gold. Nobody has been able to successfully mine this stuff since it was discovered back in the 1990s. Back around 2001, when George W. Bush first wanted to go into Afghanistan, you know, some of the conspiracy theories, you could call them, or some of the speculation or whatever about why he wanted to do it. I mean, Paul called earlier and said, you know, what were the reasons? There were two major, for lack of a better phrase, conspiracy theories, or attempts to explain why America would want to invade and occupy Afghanistan back in 2001. And one was the so-called Tappy pipeline. General Electric had built this giant natural gas-fired power plant and in India, on the border with Pakistan, or near the border with Pakistan. And the natural gas was supposed to come from Turkmenistan. There was a deal to get the fuel for that from Turkmenistan, or this is how the story went, right? I've never been able to independently verify this, but you can, you know, there's a Wikipedia page about it. This is not some obscure 9/11 truther thing or whatever. That the gas was supposed to go from Turkmenistan through a pipeline across Afghanistan, across Pakistan to India. Thus, TAPI, the Tappy pipeline. So that was one theory, was that we had to have Afghanistan in order to have the Tappy pipeline. Another theory was, hey, we just discovered that there's $3 trillion worth of in particular, you know, lithium, which we need for lithium-ion batteries for cars. And that's why I predicted that if we don't develop, or Europe doesn't develop some sort of a collaborative relationship with the Taliban, like we do with repressive regimes all over the world, including China, who's got, you know, Uyghurs in concentration camps. If we don't develop some sort of a relationship with Afghanistan, China is going to. And a year from now, you're going to see mining operations in Afghanistan supervised by people from China, and they're going to be rebuilding Afghanistan using soft power, not hard power. They're not going to come in with guns and say, you must give it to us, like we tried to do with the oil in Iraq. Remember Dick Cheney? Iraq has 10% of the world's oil, the largest oil reserves in the world. Didn't work in Iraq, didn't work in Afghanistan. And then, of course, there's the third theory, the one that I laid out earlier, which is that George W. Bush wanted this to be Pearl Harbor. He wanted to be FDR. He wanted to be fighting World War II. You know, FDR just kept getting reelected. And, you know, as Bush said, you know, his daddy only had a 3-day war in Iraq. That wasn't long enough to get him reelected. If he got elected, he was going to have a real war. And Afghanistan was his first chance to be seen as a commander-in-chief, was his phrase. So, anyhow, that's going on. I want to get into, you know, what's going on with the schools in Texas and Georgia, well, and Florida, excuse me, and across the South right now as well, because we're right on the edge of back to school. In fact, in some states and some counties, we're already at back to school. So there's just an awful lot to talk about, and I will be, you know, we will get to all of these things as we go through the program. Diana in Sanford, Maine. Hey, Diana, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. You mentioned about a week ago the movie Johnny Get Your Gun, and what you just spoke about after watching that. There was a reference in it about an old man saying why young men went to war, and he said the young men go to preserve the old people's way of life. And it just speaks to, what you just said, too, about Bush. In all the wars before us, whether it's draft or not, they do get the young 18-year-olds very idealistic. Their brains are not formed yet. And they are, in essence, the slaves, you know, from plantation that do the will.
Well, I think sometimes it's idealistic young people. Many times, increasingly, it's been people who are just in desperate poverty, and the military is a way out. Right. And you know, I agree with you know, Jefferson said, "I hope I shall never live to see a day when in America our young men are willing to be shot at for a sixpence." Here we are. Right. And you know, it's why, in my opinion, it's why we need a draft. But that's a whole other debate.
And Carter had said something about it's really a shame when fathers send their own children to go and kill each other's child. You know,
other people's children.
Moreover, I did want to say that there's something wrong just with the politics of all of this. Mm-hmm. That in Congress with like Biden and Trump. I think there's enough Trumpian people in there, and that I can't believe that whether it's Christopher Wray, the FBI, whether it's January.
I'm sorry, Diana.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I kept waiting for you to make your point, but we get cut off by that guy, by that machine. Diana, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gail in Antelope, California. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, thank you. Just a couple of points I'd like to make that I haven't really heard anybody discuss. Number one, first of all, any deal that Trump has concocted should always be immediately suspect and subject to scrutiny, because Mr. Trump does not cut deals that do not benefit him directly, and he does not care whether it benefits anyone else or not. Second thing is, I understand that he set this deal in place and it was all going to happen on May 21st. What makes anybody think or assume that there was actually a plan to carry it out? The same thing with COVID. He got the vaccine made. He had no plan to distribute it.
Yeah,
they didn't find out about it until they came into office and found out there was no plan to distribute it. My guess is there was no plan to actually implement this plan that he cut. Thirdly, the Democrats have this bad thing that they do, and I love Democrats, and I've been one, and I don't intend to change, but they always get caught with their pants down. They always assume that everybody is altruistic. They're going to be able to appeal to people's better angels. That train left the station a long time ago. You don't deal with people that don't have better angels. Yeah. So the thing of it is, Mr. Pompeo wants to be president in 2024 because Pence is dead in the water because of January 6th. You watch. This is going to be all they talk about when they bring up the elections for the House and the Senate is how Biden blew it and failed it, and Pompeo's going to say he's not fit to be president. The last thing I heard on TV is they want Biden, Harris, and Pelosi to resign. Why does Pelosi have anything to do with this? Because she's the one to be president in case those two go out the water.
Yeah, yeah. Gail, trenchant observations on every single point. Spot on.
Yeah, I'll bet you're going to find Mr. Trump's taxes has got a nice big hefty donation from the Taliban in it. He sold this country out. And if anybody thinks that the pussy grabber in chief cares anything about women's rights anywhere, no, he doesn't.
Yeah, amen. Gail, thank you. Ernesto in Montgomery, Illinois. Hey, Ernesto, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just want to say that, this is nothing new with all these people trying to escape Afghanistan. This has been with, like the Indian Scouts for the cavalry. What happened once those Indian wars were done? Their tribes got sent to reservations. They were lied to by the military. The Montagnards in Vietnam. I mean, the Kurds in Iraq.
Yeah.
And Syria.
Well, the Kurds in Syria, Trump just sold them out to Erdogan, and he went in and slaughtered them. It's just that there were no cameras there at the time.
Exactly. I think the same thing happened to the Montagnards.
I don't know who they are.
They were mountain people in Vietnam that helped the Green Berets.
Ah, okay.
They were, look, this is history. This is there.
Yeah, yeah.
We can't, if people would just look back and say, if you don't want to make the same mistakes, look at history.
Yeah.
But they don't.
Well, the people who collaborate with the occupiers sometimes have a very, as much as 10%, as I recall, of Americans left the United States during and after the Revolutionary War because they had been so loyal to Britain and either continued to be loyal or were afraid of retribution.
Same thing with the draft dodgers, too. They went to Canada.
Yeah, there you go. Ernesto, thank you. Some really great observations throughout the program here today. Thank you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour, back with more of your calls and your thoughts. And I want to get into this mask mandate issue in Texas schools. I see Phil is on the line here. We'll pick him up in just a minute, too, so stick around. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available where fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So David Perry over at medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election to the Trump family's collusion with Russia to Ivanka Trump's trademarks to federal spending at Trump properties to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So the Trump death cult has metastasized, and now, Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott are the most visible faces of it. Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, was out a couple of days ago saying, we're also, he's also, very much opposed to mask mandates in schools as people are dying and as the ICUs are filled up. I mean, this is just happening in state after state after state. It's like lambs walking to the slaughterhouse. How much longer is America going to tolerate this? How much longer are Texans going to tolerate this? Phil in Austin, Texas. Hey, Phil, what do you think?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing? I'm actually a parent in the Austin Independent School District here in Texas, who instituted their mask mandate. I just want to say that for everybody wondering, in Texas, there's 67 ISDs tonight.
What's
that
an
are
ISD?
having a board meeting. What's that?
You said there's 67 ISDs. What's an ISD?
Independent school districts. So school districts, 67 of them are meeting tonight to have meetings on potential mask mandates. I know that if you go to Beto O'Rourke's Twitter feed, he has a list up of all of them. If you're a parent here like I am, I implore you to go. And if you do go, please don't film the crazy people. Film the sane people. We need some sane messaging out there.
Yeah, because I guarantee you, Phil, just like in Tennessee, you're going to see these fringe right-wing groups who are not parents and don't have kids in school showing up, shouting and screaming and making a whole big scene.
I can tell you at the AISD Austin School District meeting, there was almost none of that. There was some outside, but it was mainly parents saying, no, we want this.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing when you have this many school districts in Texas having emergency meetings a few days before school over this. It really shows you where Texas, the people of Texas, not the governor, who's a moron pretty much, but where the people of Texas are leaning.
So does school open next week in Texas? Is that the deal?
Yeah. Austin goes back next week, but a lot of school districts are going back tomorrow. So this is really a last-minute thing for a lot of them.
Right.
And I can tell you it's terrifying as a parent. I mean, we kept our daughter, well sheltered from COVID. Both of my parents were in Florida, caught it, and they've passed away. But, it's almost like, why are we going to undo 18 months of hard work to keep the kids safe? Why are we just going to undo that because, we're being told by the right wing, this is a popular stance, so I'm going to take it because, votes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got to be a tough one. I know that, just all across America, there have to be parents and grandparents who are sitting around going, okay, the kids are going back to school, get ready for a breakthrough COVID infection. And, the good news is that most people who get a breakthrough infection just have a bad cold. I have 2 members of my family right now who have had breakthrough COVID infections, and they both got bad colds. But on the other hand, there are some people, when they get a breakthrough infection, that it just knocks them down like the world's worst flu for 3 or 4 days. And nobody knows how long that's going to last. And this is why, Israel and Germany and Russia and China are all doing booster shots right now. And I think they're coming to America, but it's got to be a frightening thing. I mean, if you've got a child or a grandchild who's going back to school or going into daycare, do you continue to interact with them? Obviously, if you're a parent, you have no choice.
I mean, our daughter's getting cut off from, her grandparents when she goes back to school.
Right.
Because it's just not safe for them. Even though they're vaccinated, we just don't want to risk anything with their age.
Yeah.
But it's terrifying. I can tell you, it's very scary around here as a parent.
Yeah. Well, keep us up to date, Phil. Give me a shout back
Tom.
and
Thank you
let
for
me know
taking
how it
my
worked
call.
out. Okay. Yeah.
Will do.
Thank you, Phil.
Sir.
Good talking to you. Thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM too. Also on SiriusXM, Daryl in Washington D.C. Hey, Daryl, what's up?
Hey, how are you? Great show as always, sir.
Thank you.
Wanted to say the most maddening thing in the last 4 years is our media's reluctance to say what is going on in the world right now, and that's democracy versus autocracy. And the Trump wing of the Republican Party, which is the majority wing, is basically in the Kremlin, are the same thing. Strange bedfellows for, different reasons. But Olga Altman has already hinted at this on Twitter about Putin's involvement, and they've even had a relationship with the Taliban, prior to Trump. So
well, we did it to Russia. I mean, we funded the Mujahideen. You could just see them sitting around going, well, hey, turnabout is fair play.
Well,
I'm not saying that I know that they're doing that or even that I think that they're doing that, but, they certainly would have precedent.
Yeah, I don't think Putin plays a short game if you know anything at all about Russian intelligence. And he understands that, Biden is there by the people, and that if the next election falls and the HR 1 doesn't pass, that could be the end.
Yeah.
So just stinks to high heaven to me.
Yeah. Well, keep an eye on this one, huh? Daryl, thank you for the call.
Thank you again.
Yep, good talking to you. We'll be back on the other side of this break with more of your calls. Are you dealing with a school district where you live? Are you a parent or grandparent who's concerned? What are the local politics that are happening around you? And, your thoughts on what's going on in Afghanistan right now, which is obviously the biggest story of the day.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And have you heard anybody in the mainstream media talk about George W. Bush trying to get us into Afghanistan and why?
We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained, but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump Triumphs," and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
Really means a lot to us. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? You know, the last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Anthony Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you and picking up your phone calls. Mike in Fresno, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hey, I just want to cover a couple quick comments. Osama bin Laden declared war on America in 1996.
Yep.
Okay.
And there was an extensive piece that he published or was published about him in the New York Times in 1998. Around the same time that the Project for a New American Century was, pounding on Clinton, saying you need to invade Iraq, in which he said that that he was coming after us, that bin Laden was coming after us. Number one, because we still had soldiers left over from Daddy Bush's Gulf War in the Bin Sultan Air Force Base in Saudi Arabia. We were defiling the holy land of Saudi Arabia by having women drive cars and men walking around, drinking alcohol and watching pornography. And number two, that he felt that the price of oil had to be at $100 a barrel or more. Otherwise, we were exploiting Saudi Arabia. And at that point in time, oil was around $30, $35 a barrel. And he said, until that price of oil goes up and Americans leave the Air Force Base, until those things happen, he's going to attack the United States. And sure enough, what did George W. Bush do after 9/11? He pulled our soldiers out of the Air Force Base in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and the 9/11 attackers was one Egyptian, one Lebanon, 2 United Arab Emirates, and 15 Saudis.
There you go.
Okay.
Nobody from Afghanistan.
Blows my mind.
Not a single person from Afghanistan.
Not a single one from Afghanistan. They went there to train. There's no oil there, so that's a good place to bomb.
Yeah.
But the thing that really scares me is from the Military Times that Donald Trump has redeployed 2,500 Americans back to the Prince Sultan Air Base. And Joe Biden's administration is looking at more bases in the kingdom.
Oh, my.
Are we going to do the same thing again?
I didn't know that, Mike. I'm just taking your word for it. If
militarytimes.com.
Yeah. No. It doesn't surprise me. That's the sad thing.
I've got one last question for you.
Go for it.
Quick one. Did Kuwait actually drill diagonally under the border?
I'm not sure anybody knows for sure. I mean, that was the allegation that Saddam Hussein was making, and I think it was widely accepted to be true at the time.
I was thinking that'd be the perfect Gulf of Tonkin excuse.
Yeah. Well, that's
all I got.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Mike, yeah, thanks a lot for the call. Dale in Pensacola, Florida. Hey, Dale, what's up?
Thanks, Tom, for taking my call. Real quick, we lost our opportunity for soft power in Afghanistan right after the Russians drove over the border. We could have gone in there, paved some roads for them, drilled some water wells for them, and showed them that America was not all about bombing people. We were about helping people. We helped you get rid of the Russians. Now we're going to help you build your country.
And this is what China's doing all over the world. Instead of building, I mean, they're building a huge military. Obviously, I think they're getting ready to try to take Taiwan. But a lot of relative to their military, I don't know. But I do know that they're spending hundreds of billions, maybe trillions of dollars on developing countries where there are natural resources that they want. And it's kind of cynical and self-serving, but it is that soft power that you're talking about, Dale. And if we want to be an international player, it would be so much better if we use carrots than sticks.
Absolutely, John. But the military-industrial complex has too much power in this country. They'd rather sell helicopters and bombs to our military to drop bombs in Afghanistan. It's the same policy we use in Southeast Asia and in Cuba. If we'd have used soft power in both those areas, we would have spent a lot less money bombing people back into the Stone Age and maybe helping them develop their country. Vietnam asked us right after World War II, please tell the French to get out of our country. We don't want them here. We said, no, we need the French in our on our side in Europe, so we're going to let them stay there.
Well, and if you want to know, yeah, I agree. And if you want to know how soft power works, look at what we did in Europe after World War II.
Absolutely.
We rebuilt that continent. I mean, and they've been our friends ever since. It worked out really well. So anyhow, Dale
worked in Afghanistan too.
Yep, Dale, thank you for the call. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm always trying to be a better American, working to create a more perfect union, and personally, I believe in paying it forward. So I think we need to go in to Afghanistan with a plan. We need to talk to the Taliban. We have biological warfare that we can use against COVID, and we need to approach with goodwill. We need to promise with a plan to vaccinate every Afghan, including the Taliban, starting with the women and the children. We can do it in their schools. That way we can preserve the schools. We can give them masks and oxygen. We can promise and we can deliver, because we've proven that we can do it here in this country. And what do we ask for in return? I don't know, that they accept our apology for screwing them over for 20 years. I don't know. I mean, I just like the pay it forward. Always think of something that you can do that will help them, that will make them feel at the end of the day, how did they make me feel? Oh, they made me feel great.
I think it's going to be tough,
really
given the last 20 years, given that there's probably not a single family in Afghanistan that doesn't have or knows somebody who has a family member who was killed by American forces.
I know. And I'm not saying
That's
we
a
can
tough
wipe
one.
that clean.
I mean, look at how long the
it's
Confederacy nurtured their grudge. It's like, you know.
I live in Florida. I didn't grow up in Florida. I grew up in New England. I can't believe the people down here don't like me simply because I'm a liberal, until they like me and admit that, oh, gee, I didn't think I was going to like you because you're a liberal. I'm like, what? I understand that mentality, but you have to get beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it.
You know, you take that wherever you go. Let's bring it to Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, soft power,
it,
yeah.
you know?
Lori, thank you. Thank you. The other question is, do we want to be a world power, or do we want to do what England did after World War II and just say, okay, we're going to stop the whole colonial thing? Frank, which is another conversation for another time. Frank in Waterbury, Connecticut. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I don't know what that previous lady was talking about. But do you think that what's going on in Afghanistan is basically do you think Biden and his administration have basically thrown up their hands as far as what's going on in the international community, and they're going to focus more on domestic issues such as COVID, the racial problems?
I think they can walk and chew gum.
We got a lot of domestic
What's
issues.
going on in Afghanistan is Biden is completing the process that Trump initiated in 2019.
Right, but what I'm saying is I don't think there's going to be a long-term focus on trying to be the world's police anymore, especially under this administration. I think they're more focused on what's going on domestically, because we got a lot of problems here. We're imploding from within, and we don't have time to be worrying about people that don't even want us around over there. They don't want us around.
Yeah.
My father only had an 8th grade education, but he told me, you're not going to change people's ways and customs who've been doing things for thousands of years, overnight. So they don't want us over there. We can just cut ties and focus on what we got going on over here, because we got a whole set of problems and a lot of things we need to address over here.
Yeah, and we got to
get our house. We got to get our house in order.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
I'm with you, Frank. And we're not going to change them or their minds or their hearts at the end of a barrel of a gun either. Frank, thank you. Max in Sacramento. Hey, Max, what's up?
Money and oil. That's what's up. Bush wanted to go into Afghanistan to the Caspian Sea because there was a lot of oil up there, and he wanted to build a pipeline through the works of Halliburton. You remember that construction company that Cheney had a lot of stock in, and
Cheney was the CEO.
Down through the Turkestan or whatever.
Yeah, you're talking about the TAPI pipeline, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. Yes.
Yeah, so he had the Taliban that was raising crops for opium at the time, and he needed a government there to take control. So he goes and hires a Union Oil rep, to be president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai.
Right.
Because he was Afghan.
That's right. And I think a lot of people forget that Karzai was an oil consultant.
Yeah, from Union Oil.
Yeah.
So he tried to get him to, run the country so he can bring that oil down through Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
see, that was, this is an hour or so ago. I said, there's basically a couple of theories. Number one, George W. Bush wanted to turn 9/11 into Pearl Harbor so that he could have a Franklin Roosevelt presidency.
Right.
He could be a big deal. Number two, there's $3 trillion worth of rare earth minerals and gold in Afghanistan that was only discovered in the 1990s. And, people say that we wanted to mine that. Number three was the TAPI pipeline, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. I don't know if any one of those three things was the principal thing when George W. Bush decided that instead of pursuing a criminal, prosecution of bin Laden and his friends, that he was going to declare war against some country that had nothing to do basically with 9/11. I just don't know. These are the questions that very often you don't learn until 50 years after everybody's dead, but they're worth asking. Max, thank you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back, 46 minutes past the hour. Bill in Sun City, Arizona. Hey, Bill, what's up? Bill, you are on the air. Whoop, Bill just hung up. Sometimes that happens when people are trying to take their phone off speaker. You know, they hit the wrong button. Let's try Ken in La Center, Washington. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm going to stress education again. You know, back in the early 80s, I read a book, A Month Club Selection. It was, and I can't locate it right now, but it was concerning the last 500 years' history of empires.
Mm-hmm.
And they've all followed the same path where they, you know, go to foreign places. They want to extract resources, make a lot of money. They have to have then the commerce supported by military.
Mm-hmm.
Then they get overextended militarily, and that's where most of their money goes, and they ignore the people at home and their infrastructure, whatever.
Well, it's certainly the story of the Roman Empire, Ken.
Well, over the last 500 years, I mean, look at the Spanish and the Portuguese and the English and French and, you know, all the European countries.
Yeah, I don't think you could argue, though, that the Spanish the period of empire lasted 500 years. I think you could build a strong argument that it lasted maybe 70 years.
No,
and the Portuguese was less than that. And basically it had to do with discovering a whole bunch of gold in the New World.
Yeah, the history goes back 500 years, not each country.
Well, I'm not even talking about country. I'm talking about the period during which they were empire. You know, I've heard these theories before that America is basically replicating the Roman Empire, and you know, I actually read a book about this last year. In fact, we interviewed the author. Forgive me for not remembering his name, but I think at a certain point, historical comparisons begin to break down. You can't always extrapolate from the past about the future or the present.
Yeah, I just think we need to go in a different direction.
Yeah. Well, that's where I was saying, you know, after World War I and World War II, Great Britain, which was very much empire, you know, they were running countries all over the world, particularly across Africa and the Middle East and India. Great Britain said, okay, that's and Hong Kong. They said, that's it. We're going to pull the plug. We're going to start looking after Britons. We're going to look after people in England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that's pretty much going to be it. It's just the people in our neighborhood. And everybody else, we're going to let you go. And I don't recall the years of all the other countries, but I worked in Uganda, and I'm pretty sure it was 1956, so it's post-World War II, that the British just pulled out of Uganda and said, okay, you guys are on your own. And, you know. Okay. So it's
thanks, Tom.
Yeah, good talking to you, Ken. I mean, this is a lesson that we all, I think, need to learn, are the limits of empire. And the danger of hubris, of thinking that because we are the wealthiest country in the world, in large part because of our natural resource base, which we are burning through and exploiting terribly fast, but because of that, we think that, well, you know, we can do anything, we can take what we want, we can control other countries, and sometimes it's true. But you know, the side effects, the consequences, the negative fallout can be extraordinarily destructive. And do we really want to do that? Do we really want to, you know, is being the Roman Empire our goal? Well, look at how the Roman Empire turned out. I mean, you know, it took 100 years or so for it to completely collapse into being the Catholic Church, but, you know, it didn't go well. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, And in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Well, I'm okay. I'm kind of, the implementation, and I just want to touch this and set it aside, on what's going on in Afghanistan and the border are mistakes on the Biden administration, I believe. But to the point, he may have made the right decision, but when I'm looking at it, as of all the debt that it was accrued from, it would have been from 2001 on, July of 2001 on, that went on the credit card, all of that infrastructure over there, electronics, concrete for runways, all the
$2.5 trillion
items. Yeah, it was all borrowed. Okay, and when you borrow $30,000 on a vehicle, and you look at it and go, well, this isn't really what I want something else. Do you just trash it and walk away from your investment, or do you look at it from including some humanitarian points, where we had an open society where people were actually civilized and who wanted to grow and who wanted to build a better society, but because of things you covered earlier in the show, where they were undermined and kneecapped, the military was undermined and kneecapped by Trump's haphazard involvement back in 2019. I think it was destined to fail, but I hate to see all the good that we did just get flushed down the toilet while we're still trying to pay it off.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's my point, sir.
Yeah. Well, you made it very well, Randy. And this is why I think that we need, the next conversation we need to have after this current hysteria ends is, what do we do going forward? Do we exercise soft power, or do we just turn Afghanistan over to China? China has already, it's in the news, it was in the Financial Times today, China is already making overtures to the Taliban saying, hey, we're around, we can help out. You want to rebuild your country? We can help it with that. Randy, thank you. I got to run. Mike in Arvada, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hiya, Ben, Tom.
Hey, good. What's up?
Hey, back in '87, the Mujahideen is the Taliban. I was on the holding pattern. It didn't make any sense till I saw Joe Wilson's war.
You mean Charlie Wilson's war, yeah.
I thought it was Joe, okay.
Joe was the guy who outed Bush over the yellow cake uranium from Nigeria.
Oh, yeah. Way to go. That good Joe, yeah.
Whose wife was the CIA officer.
We bought them all brand new walkouts. There was 5 or 6 of them. It was obvious, but one of them kept getting up. We were in a holding pattern between San Antonio and Austin to get some giant tires. I was dealing with coal mines, but this guy kept getting up and bothering this lady with a little kid, trying to get him candy, and the little kid started crying. I already told him, yelled at him. He looked at me, and so finally he wouldn't listen to the female flight attendant at all. He was ignoring her. And finally I got up, and as soon as he grabbed for me, I just grabbed his fancy new coat and threw him back into his seat.
So, Mike, you're telling me that in the 80s you encountered guys from the Mujahideen? How did you know? On a commercial airplane in the United States? How did you know? I mean,
until I watched Charlie Wilson's war, Tom, I didn't know.
I see. So it's kind of a retrospective perspective. Yeah. I get it. Yeah. Okay, Mike, I got to move along. Thank you. Jackie in Port Orchard, Washington. Jackie, I think we have 30 seconds. Oh, we're done?
Yes, hi. Hey,
I'd just like to appeal to all of your listeners right now. There's devastating things happening all over the globe. But after your show, take 2 minutes, send love and light for 2 minutes to all of Afghanistan and its population and everybody making decisions for the Afghanistan.
I'm with you. I'm with you. And I believe in that stuff, Jackie. I think that, our thoughts have power and our prayers have power. Jackie, thank you for the call. Love and light to the people of Afghanistan. They sure need it. Thanks so much for being with us today. What a day. What a wild ride. President Biden will be giving his speech in, I believe, about a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, get out there, get active, tag You're It, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.